For most of my adult life, I've watched American leadership fail at the same thing over and over again. A problem gets named, hearings are held, speeches are made, bills are introduced, sometimes bills are even passed, and somehow, decades later, the problems are still there, sometimes even worse. Healthcare costs, immigration, deficit, education, infrastructure, housing, birth control, gun control, the list is long. After a while, you start asking not just why can't they fix it, but what if not fixing it's actually become part of a business model? I'm not suggesting that every public servant is corrupt. Far from it. They're real people who go into politics for really good reasons. But the system has a terrible incentive. It's baked into it. Unresolved problems are useful. They help fundraise. They turn out the base. They keep donors writing checks and they keep the campaigns running. Solved problems don't do any of that. So we've ended up with a political class that's really good at harnessing and taking advantage of the problems we have and much worse at solving them. That is the lens I bring to almost everything I see in Washington. It's not left or right, it's the structure. It's the system that is designed to protect itself, and now that same system's reaching for artificial intelligence. Today's episode begins with what Senator Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman AOC are doing on the subject of artificial intelligence. They've introduced the AI Data Center Moratorium Act, a bill that would pause the construction of new AI data centers until national safeguards are in place. Before I get into it, I want to be clear. I'd be making the same argument if this case study came from the right. And there is a case study from the right. Around the same time, the Trump administration and the Department of War were pressuring Anthropic over the company's refusal to remove restrictions on mass domestic surveillance and, of all things, fully autonomous weapons. Different teams, different methods, same instincts. Control artificial intelligence. Get the keys to the AI. So yeah, this is not a left versus right thing. I have no real interest in joining a partisan team on this subject. This is a watch what they do, not what they say kind of episode. What they're doing right now with artificial intelligence is something every one of us should be paying attention to. My name is Gil Paul. Welcome back to the Human Precipice. Let me set the stage here because the bill didn't come out of nowhere. Sanders has been building towards this for months. Late last year is when he first started calling for a stop on data center construction. Then the night before he introduced this bill, he spent about 30 minutes on the Senate floor giving a speech on the subject. The op-eds, the speeches, the rallies, it's all part of the same organized structure holding this effort together. Even sympathetic outlets have noticed. The New Republic, which broadly supports Sanders' politics, described the AI fight as a, quote, natural outgrowth of Sanders' focus on billionaires over the last year. Transition this to the next chapter of the anti-oligarch story, with AI plugged in as the new villain. Now, this is not automatically a problem. Politicians evolve their issues and coalitions broaden, but it's worth noting that this bill is being marketed as an urgent technical safety response. And the people watching closely are reading it as something more like political brand extension. Let's talk about the panel. It was hosted with the Future of Life Institute and included Max Tegmark, highly respected. All of these panel members are highly respected, but Max Tegmark, David Kruger, Shui Lan and Zheng Yi. These last two, both from China, and I would welcome you to read my essay on this, which will be published shortly at the Human Precipice website. I think I'll get into a little more detail on the Chinese connection there. Anyway, these are smart people, they're serious people, and they do have real expertise. But every one of them came from roughly the same school of thought. This is the doomer existential risk mindset. It's the view that AI could become an extinction level threat and that drastic government action is required before it's too late. This is a legitimate school of thought, but it's not the only school of thought. There are serious researchers who think the extinction framing is overstated. There are economists who think AI might produce the greatest expansion of human capabilities since electricity. There are engineers working on practical safety who would tell you that halting data centers does very little to address the real risks that they're spending their days trying to solve. None of these voices were on the panel. So for the first 30 minutes of an hour-long presentation, the audience heard only about suicide rates, Oppenheimer moments, slaughter bots, deceptive alignment, and a dangerous intelligence explosion, not to mention nuclear war and humanity reduced to gorillas dependent on the mercy of a smarter species. Again, some of these fears are real and we need to take them seriously. I've talked about some of these in previous episodes. AI safety needs to be taken seriously, but 30 minutes of curated fear presented by a sitting United States senator as the sober building of consensus of world experts, that's not a conversation. That is a manipulation. It is the engineering of our shared reality. There is one more thing about that panel that I alluded to earlier and should be mentioned. Two of the four panelists, Shui Lan and Zheng Yi, are not just academics. Shui chairs China's National AI Governance, the committee under the Ministry of Science and Technology. Zheng leads the Beijing Institute of AI Safety and Governance, an institution that's embedded into the Chinese government's AI apparatus. These are not independent voices. They are state-aligned figures from a country that's racing the United States in AI development and shows absolutely no signs of pausing anything. This is worth thinking on. 5 weeks before the panel, Mark Warner, a Democrat and not a tech industry voice, publicly called the idea of a moratorium stopping construction of AI centers or data centers. He called it idiocy. He warned it will only mean China is going to be able to move more quickly ahead of us. And he said, this is one we can't lose. That critique was already on the public record. And then Sanders convened a panel that actually included figures formally embedded in Beijing's AI policy apparatus. Whose interests are getting served by American pause in constructing AI data centers? I think that is a legitimate question we should be asking. When the senator is running point on this pause, it does seem to be especially troubling, and I don't understand his choice in who he's sharing the stage with. I can't know what's in his heart or in his mind, but I think it's fair to ask the question. Okay, now on to the bill itself. The stated goal is simple: pause new AI data centers until safeguards are in place. The argument's that we can't allow a handful of billionaires and tech oligarchs to decide the future of humanity. Okay, fair enough. I don't want a handful of tech billionaires deciding the future of humanity either. Uh, but who does this bill actually restrain, and who does it actually empower? The data centers that already exist, they keep running, and the models that are already trained, they keep operating. The companies that have already created massive compute and infrastructure, they keep their head start. Now, startups without that infrastructure, they get frozen out. Smaller competitors, they get frozen out. Open source efforts, they get squeezed. Meanwhile, our foreign competitors, especially in countries that aren't bound by American legislation, they keep on moving. China builds, we pause. The race doesn't stop, we just stop running it. So, a bill proposed in the name of stopping oligarchs actually could lead, or would lead, to locking those existing oligarchs into place. It's actually empowering them. It hands a new set of keys, controls, to the federal regulatory class. The people who will decide when the safeguards are sufficient and when they're not. This is not a moratorium on power. This is a transfer of power. This is where alarm bells should be going off everywhere for everyone. The bill bundles together AI safety, environmental impact, electricity prices, job loss, privacy, the core of democracy. These are all very different problems with very different solutions, and yet somehow they all point to the same answer: stop the data centers. Come on, people. When one solution claims to solve every problem, you gotta pay attention. It's just not how real problems get solved. It is how political marketing works. Okay, let's be clear here. Concerns around data centers are not imaginary. Power demands are real. Water use is real. There are impacts on local communities. And if your electric bill's going up because a data center was dropped into your neighborhood, this is not a philosophical issue. You're paying the bill. So yeah, we should regulate the impact. We should protect communities. We should require transparency. We should also be building smarter grids and stop subsidizing private infrastructure with public pain. But a national construction halt on data centers, it is a blunt instrument, and blunt instruments have side effects. The environmental conversation should include both costs and possibilities. AI uses enormous energy, no doubt about it. But there was no conversation in any real sense during that panel meeting about AI being able to help solve enormous energy problems, better grid management, new materials, better chemistry, climate modeling, carbon capture, probably even fusion. The labor conversation should also be honest. If AI is going to disrupt work, and it is, halting data centers in America doesn't stop disruption. It just means the disruption arrives from somewhere else. The real worker conversation is much harder. What does the social contract look like if machines do more and more of the work that humans are accustomed to being paid for? What happens to healthcare tied to employment? What happens to dignity tied to a paycheck? These are conversations that actually serve working families, and they're conversations that force politicians to do something hard, to imagine a future where we're building something new. It forces them to negotiate trade-offs and disappoint some people on both sides. Holding data centers or calling for a stop to construction, creating fear, that's much easier than what we really need to be looking at. AI is not just a technology story. In exploring this subject for as long as I have, it's become a recurring theme of this podcast. AI is a reflection of those things about humanity that we must address. AI is a story about us, and it relates to this specific video, our leadership, our public square, our incentives, our appetite for simple stories. It's really not about Bernie Sanders, and it's really not even about a moratorium on data centers. It's about a pattern. Too many AI conversations are set up with one framework at a time. It's the doomer panel, and then it's the accelerationist on the other podcasts. It's the CEO interview. Each one feels complete, and each one is, but on its own terms. Each one paints villains and heroes. But the conversations we actually need, where we have the economists and the climate scientists, workers, ordinary citizens together wrestling with each other, those conversations barely exist in our public square. And why is that? Because the complicated middle ground doesn't fundraise. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. The complicated middle asks people to hold competing truths at the same time. And our political media structure, the machine that we've created, is just terrible at that. So we get curated panels, curated outrage, curated expertise, curated fear, curated optimism. And then along comes AI. A technology that can give ordinary people direct access to the kind of analysis and synthesis that used to require entire institutions. A working class American sitting at a kitchen table at midnight might be able to ask better questions about policy proposal than anything they were going to get from any cable news segment. That is a threat, not only to billionaires, but to the entire architecture of curated information. And that's the architecture the political class depends on. I said at the top that this is not only a left-wing problem, so let me close that loop. While Sanders and AOC are trying to slow AI infrastructure from one side, the Trump administration was moving from the other direction. The Department of War, in its conflict with Anthropic, pressed the company over two restrictions. I didn't mention them earlier: full autonomous weapons and mass domestic surveillance. Anthropic refused. The company said it would not allow the technology to be used for mass surveillance of Americans, and it would not remove its restrictions on fully autonomous lethal weapons. The administration responded by moving to cut out Anthropic, to make them impossible to work with, make them a supply chain risk, a label associated with national security threats. Court documents later said the designation was based at least in part on Anthropic's hostile manner through the press. In plain English, they pushed back publicly and the government punished them for doing it. I should disclose something here. I use all the major AI frontier models, and Claude, which is made by Anthropic, does play a role in helping me build this channel. So yeah, weigh that for what it's worth. The structural point doesn't depend on me. The court filings are public. The pattern is clear. From the left, halt infrastructure. Do it in the name of protecting workers, protecting communities. From the right, force access. Do it in the name of national security while punishing a private company for refusing to remove safeguards on surveillance and autonomous weapons. Different teams, different slogans, same instinct. Get the keys. control AI. And I'm not arguing for no rules around AI. We need rules. We need transparency. We need audits. We need to be able to evaluate these models that are releasing at a faster and faster clip. We need liability, or we need to understand whose liability. We need real mechanisms that address real risks. What I am arguing, and what we need to watch very carefully, is when the language of safety becomes a cover for control. Because whoever controls AI is going to control something much larger than a market. They're going to control the information layer people use to understand reality. If the AI helping you research history is quietly shaped by emphasizing some things but burying others, your sense of the past is being shaped with it. If the AI helping you to understand policy nudges you towards one conclusion and you can't see what was filtered out, you're not fully thinking for yourself anymore. You're thinking inside lines that somebody else has drawn for you. This is why the keys matter. Not because data centers are sacred, and not because tech companies are saints, not because governments have no role or shouldn't have a role. It's because the keys matter. AI is becoming the infrastructure of the next era. It's the layer through which people are going to ask all their questions and form their judgments and learn history and understand policy and decide what's true. The answer to that can't be hand the keys to fewer people. It has to be the opposite. Multiple labs, multiple approaches, open source wherever possible, transparency wherever possible, real competition, citizen access, distributed power, not a private oligarchy, not a government monopoly, and not a political class that has spent decades proving how useful unresolved problems can be. I started this episode by saying that our political system is excellent at naming problems and much, much worse at solving them. AI may be the first technology in our lifetimes that genuinely threatens this arrangement. AI done right could let ordinary people see through the curation. It could let us see through the marketing and ask better questions, understand the policy. We could reach our own conclusions without needing a political media class as a middleman. This is why both sides, left and right, are reaching for the keys. Not because either side has worked out a coherent theory of AI safety, but because both sides understand, even if just instinctively, this is technology that threatens their business model. Their power depends on what comes next. So, here's what I could tell you. Watch what they do, not what they say. I'm Gil Paul. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Human Precipice, and I'll see you next time.